Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.
Hello and welcome to the Outer Hour. It's Wednesday at 7 p.m. and this is the time that our regular viewers tune in and join us for another 60 minutes of insightful conversation. If this is your first time watching the Outer Hour, welcome to the show. You can watch the show on either YouTube on our live stream or go to the Outer Facebook page and watch it there. Our regular viewers will be familiar with that. And the nice thing about the show is you can comment. Your comments are valued and wanted. Your questions are needed. So don't forget that as the show rolls along, pop your comments and questions down below the live video. We'll get to your hellos in just a moment. It has been customary on the show for some time now to say hello to each other in true South African style, and we'll see who's on board. So don't be shy, say hello. If it's your first time, tell us you're a first-time viewer. If you've never watched the show before, tell us where you're watching from. Many of our viewers are expats watching from around the world, but the bulk of our viewers come from inside the shores of South Africa. We'll be putting your hellos up on screen as well as your questions and comments throughout the show. Tonight, we have the good folks from Defending Our Democracy on the show. We'll be talking about our constitutional democracy and whether it's under threat and digging below the surface of that conversation. I'll introduce you to our three fantastic guests in just a moment, but let me while we're using the word fantastic, let's go behind the scenes, shall we, and talk to the fantastic crew behind the Outer Hour. Our producer, Devaney Davids, is away at the moment, but Samantha van Nispen, the head of comms marketing at Outer, and your Facebook moderator is on board from her home office. Hello, Sam.
Hello, Tom. Hello, viewers. Nice to be on the Facebook side this week.
It's good to have you as well. So when people comment in the Facebook section, that's you behind the outer name?
Correct. It'll be me all night tonight.
Well, I think I can hear a collective yay! Samantha van Nispen will be moderating your comments underneath the video in the Facebook feed. If you go along to YouTube or you're watching on YouTube, then the person that you'll be chatting and engaging with is Masego Motsoneng. Hello, Masego.
Hello. I hope you guys are ready to interact with us and our wonderful guests from Defend Our Democracy. And a big shout out to the show's producer, Dev, whose birthday was yesterday. So happy birthday, Dev.
All right. Who's going to sing happy birthday to Devaney Davids?
When she comes back next week,
all
of us.
Well, no, you're on camera and on the record now, Masego. We're going to hold you to it. You're going to be the leader of the choir. Let me introduce you to our guest this evening. No stranger to the show. She was on once before. I think when reminding me earlier on, Zakira, was that it was when we were busy with the Orange Mask campaign from Defending Our Democracy, Zakira Vadi. Hello, Zakira. Good to have you with us, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Hey. Good day. Thanks, Tom, and good evening, good night to all of the listeners. Thanks for having me.
Well, we're looking forward to an engaging conversation with you and our other guests, including Advocate Majanko Gumbi. Good evening, Advocate.
Good evening. Sorry about the light. I'm calling from a different location this time.
No, well, we can see you and we can hear you, and that's the main thing. And thank you for joining us, ma'am. Completing the trio of guests from Defending Our Democracy is Dudwetsang Meti. How's it, Dudu? How are you? Hello, Dudu. You may be on mute.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
I'm good, thanks, Tom. I'm good, thanks. And thanks for having us on your show.
It's only a pleasure. Looking forward to the conversation. So, are you ready as you sit at home or in your office or wherever you may be inside South Africa or outside of our borders for a discussion on our democracy and whether it's under threat? Give it a bit of thought. We want your comments, we want your questions, and we want them below this video. So, we're looking forward to the engagement. Right, before we get started, I've got to direct you, as I always do, on a Wednesday night to the Outer page. If you're on it at the moment on Facebook, then it's very easy just to take your device, and if you're working on a phone, you just do what I'm doing now, and you go along to the live video, and there I am. I hit the like button, hit the share button, And bang, now all my friends can see it as well. So please like and share the show, and let's get the message out to as many people as possible. Always grateful for the likes and shares we get, and for our regular viewers. Let's see who's on board quickly. We'll take a minute to say hello to, first on board, Claire Feldman, who has only ever missed one outer hour. I think you need a medal, Claire. Evening team outer, says Claire Feldman. Nomsa Daele says, good evening. Hello, Nomsa. Thank you for joining us. Good to see you on our screen. Craig Blichnote from London. How's it, Craig? Nice to have you on board all the way from London. Evening all. How's it, Tom London? Well, I'm assuming Craig's in London. He isn't, actually. Craig's in Johannesburg. I'm reading my name there and thinking he's in London. Andrew Jennings, another regular viewer. Evening team, nice to be here, and what an exciting topic, isn't it just, Andrew? Looking forward to your questions and comments. Alex Alshove is on board. How's it, Outer team, says Alex. Adrian Knowles says, hello guys. Down in Cape Town is our very own Rachel Fisher. Yes, for Team Outer Organization Undoing Tax Abuse. How's it, Rachel? Hope you're doing well. Jeff P. Scott says, good evening everybody. We'll do a few more. Janine Blake says, hi everyone. Jennifer van der Walt says, hi all. Glennis Truby says, hi guys. Diane LaRue says, good evening everybody. I hope everyone is doing well. I think we are. We're just cold and battling with food and fuel prices. Gerard Liebenberg says, hello. Scott MacDonald is watching from London. Jurgens van der Walt is in Sedgefield in the Western Cape. Janine Blake says, hi Sam. That's nice. Chat to Sam and chat to each other. That sense of community in the comment section is always admirable. Love to see it. And I see everyone is starting to say hello to each other. We'll do one more. Melissa Whitehorn from Pretoria. Hello Melissa. Nice to have you on board. Okay, are you ready with your comments and questions? We can't wait to take them and put them to our guests. Let's start the show, shall we? Well, let's talk about defending our democracy and what your perception and memories may be of its launch. I remember there were very prominent names at the time. I'm thinking of people like Reverend Frank Chikane, Adrian Gore, and others, leaders in civil society, leaders in business, and church leaders got together and formed an organization called Defending Our Democracy. But I would actually like one of our guests to tell us what Defending Our Democracy is. Let's start with Sakira Vadi, shall we? And ask, let's start with Dudwet Sang and Meti. I'm going to start with Dudwet Sang. Dudwet Sang, what is Defending Our Democracy for the benefit of our viewers who may not know much about your organization?
Sure. So the Defend Our Democracy is a campaign at the moment. We are not necessarily, or we haven't yet registered as an organization or a formalized NPO. But the campaign and its intentions is to stand up against attempts aimed at destabilizing the country. And, the signs of destabilization was seen mainly through the July unrest, capture, corruption, and evident destruction of public infrastructure, the hollowing out of SOEs and the public purse. And basically the campaign is intended to also rally and mobilize communities as the last line of defense for our democracy against all of these elements of destabilization. And the campaign was started in March last year, as you had mentioned earlier. And basically it was from mounting pressure from civil society organizations, the religious sector, to say something wrong is happening in our country and something needs to be done. And that is when Reverend Frank and other activists, anti-apartheid activists, came together and formed Defend Our Democracy campaign. At the moment, the campaign is building up towards the Conference for Democratic Renewal, which will take place on the 1st and 2nd of July this year. And again, the campaign or the conference seeks to really figure out what is wrong with our country. So how do we respond more meaningfully to, destabilization forces? How do we strengthen democracy as the main outcome? And how do we try and reignite a sense of civic or active citizenry in the country so that people, can be the main stakeholder in this democracy, so that the politics of this country are more people-centered, and that, when we talk about this constitutional democracy that we're in, we can say in more meaningful ways that we truly experience it. We are in a democratic state. Me as a South African citizen can engage meaningfully. I can hold my leaders accountable is what we want to achieve in this conference. So in a nutshell, that is what the campaign is, and that we are building towards a conference coming up in July this year.
We'll talk about the conference in a moment. I'm keen to hear from you, Dudasang, what the spirit inside your campaign is like. I mean, you're talking about some very smart people who are aligned to it. Am I correct in saying you're non-partisan? I mean, you've got ANC stalwarts as part of this campaign, and then business leaders. And just give us an idea of who is part of defending our democracy.
So you're right in pointing out that Defend Our Democracy was considerably started by people who were very active in the ANC. But at the same time, these are people who also believe in constitutional democracy and believe that, our democracy, our constitution is first and foremost. And so when we talk about the Defend Our Democracy being non-partisan, we're saying and appealing to any ordinary member of society to say and reflect on the kind of, or the state of our democracy and say something is amiss here. And if we could all rally together, we can perhaps come up with meaningful solutions to strengthen our democracy. So the campaign is for everyone, for those who are interested in, volunteering their skills, their expertise to the campaign. We're more than welcome to receive that kind of assistance, whether people want to even provide submission on this conference paper. We're open to it. So yes, the campaign is not necessarily limited to those who are ANC members. It is very non-partisan, and we're open to any kind of suggestion.
And Outer was one of the first to climb on board, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct. And we also do have support from many other civil society organizations who have helped us quite incredibly to gain momentum and mobilize quite meaningfully among society.
Well, much of the focus of the campaign since its inception last year, March, was on corruption and state capture. And I'm wondering who would like to take this question. The question is, has the focus shifted? And what has the campaign been busy with at the moment? Let me ask Advocate Majanko Gumbi if she'd like to climb in here. Advocate?
Well, thank you very much. I think first of all, let me answer your previous question.
Sure.
Because I don't come from the ANC, and I always have to make that point. I've never been a member of the ANC, so I always say, when people ask me, I'm like, I've never attended a branch meeting of the ANC or a regional conference or national conference at all my life. But, one finds a voice within the campaign, because I think the campaign has been busy with a number of activities. I think the important ones is reaching out to communities. You would know that in 1994, I think most South Africans were demobilized, because finally we got a democratic government that you've been asking for, that is going to work with you, do the right thing. So people stepped back a little bit to say finally. But you can see it now as these wrong things were happening that Dudu Etsang is referring to, that people were little demobilized as ordinary citizens. So you needed to reactivate that sense of civic duty, and the campaign has done very well in doing that. As you know, Outer has been part of that, the Bridge campaign, the reaching out to communities in the different provinces, reaching out to organizations, over 300 organizations that became component members of the campaign, professional bodies, community organizations. So there's been a string of activities over the last year that are leading us to this first real big national campaign. We launched the formal activity at the Constitutional Court last year. We had a big gathering of activists. Really say enough is enough at the Constitutional Court. But since then, there have been quite a number of activities.
Well, you talk about activities, and I'd like to ask Zakira about this. I mean, if you look at the Facebook page, you'll notice that there's been a lot of community engagement all around the country, Zakira. What has that engagement produced, and what has impressed you when dealing with community and community leaders? Because you've been interacting with them, obviously.
Thanks, Tom. Our most recent engagement was in Fine Town, and that's a community in the south of Johannesburg, quite impoverished, just the kind of situation that young people especially face in the community, a sense of hopelessness, lack of employment, severe poverty, and I think just a general disillusionment with the state of politics, just the inability of people to get services, to get access to water and electricity. When we visited the community, they'd been without water for several days. And I think this is the type of thing we're finding in different settings and different engagements. Prior to that, we had an engagement with a group of young people who were saying that even if they are part of civil society organizations in their communities, those civil society organizations are often beholden to government, and particularly the ruling party, because of government funding that may come through to that particular organization. And the overall sense of a very toxic politics that has seeped into, I think, society in general, beyond government itself. And those are the type of engagements that we've been having. Prior to I think, the conference-related engagements, we've also been to a community in Ntwane in Limpopo. And for the last 30 years, or so, at least into the democratic period, they haven't had access to water. So there's been over 100 million rand that has been put into the community, delivery of water tanks, but those water tanks remain empty and laying around in the community, being stolen because there's no water in them. And the sad thing is that within eyesight of the community, as you look up above the hill, there is a water reservoir that's situated there. So just an absurd situation playing itself out. And then you find a situation, for example, the Gauteng health crisis, where we've had a hospital that is burnt down, but no repair work, almost a year into it being done on the hospital. We don't even have a sense of whether the fire report or formal assessment of the structure has been conducted as yet. So if you look at those kind of scenarios playing out, you have to ask yourself, what exactly is going wrong? Over and above the kind of corruption that we saw under the previous Zuma administration, the kind of lack of oversight, the seeping in of characters like the Guptas, for example, or Salim Essa and a number of others. We're having a very different situation now where while people are trying to fix up SOEs at a national level, at a provincial level, and a municipal level, we're going to be seeing, I think, greater forms of collapse, possibly more corruption playing out as all of those networks begin to eye things at a lower level or lower levels of government. And I think that's where it impacts communities most severely. And looking at the conference and where we're going to, I think that's one of the areas that we want to concentrate on more specifically. how to improve things at a very local level and oversight at a local level.
Do you have an idea of, you speak about these problems and the communities you've met and the anxiety inside these communities. You mentioned hospitals that have been stripped of copper pipes and not been fixed in a year. I mean, the decay is obvious to anybody who touches an SOE in their lives. Do you have an idea of how to fix this, or is the point of Defend Our Democracy to get ideas from people and pull them together into one strategy, so to speak?
So, Tom, that's precisely the purpose of what this conference and the document that we've produced leading into the conference is about. It's really about getting people to be thinking about solutions themselves. And this is not just solutions of how communities need to be doing things, because I think we all know, for example, if Gift of the Givers comes into a particular community and provides a water well and the situation is sorted. But it's really about saying, but your municipality has been given so much money for provision of water. Why isn't that being used? And being able to ensure that people develop the capacity to hold leaders and public representatives accountable. So I think that this conference is meant to generate ideas, but at a greater level also begin to find consensus on what are the top priorities for the country at the moment, and then begin to look at citizen mobilization as an accompanying tool to achieve those solutions. So I think it's multifaceted, but the conference is almost, rather than being an end point, almost a starting point.
Got it. I'm looking at some of the comments coming in. I see Kara says, we're not technically a democracy until we've had a power change once, ? We're still a one-party state. Abin Saida says, it's easy to see what's wrong with our country. It's the ruling party. Let me ask Duduetsang whether it's as simple as that. Are all the problems in South Africa can be put on the doorstep of one party? Duduetsang?
Okay, I was muted.
No, that's
so
fine.
I'm tempted to say yes, but I'm also tempted to say no at the same time. I think it's a multifaceted question and a difficult one to answer. I'll say yes because the ANC is the ruling party. I'll also say no because we are in a multi-party democracy. So we've got Parliament at both national, provincial, and even local government, who all political parties have seats in these areas of the legislature and are meant to play an oversight role on the executive. And so when you have to pinpoint who to blame, it becomes very difficult to do so, because we are governed, or our politics plays out in a multi-party democracy, and so it's very difficult to answer. It is clear, however, that there is a lack of oversight playing out at legislature with opposition parties and all other political parties who are meant to keep the executive to account. But it's also fair to say that the ruling party itself, as the head of state, is failing us considerably.
Here's a comment from Donnie Duval, a question actually, saying, sounds to me that the goals of the campaign are very similar to OUTA and by extension other civil activist organizations. And he's been very blunt with the question, is there a need for Defend Our Democracy? I guess the question is, why do you exist if there are other civil activist organizations, for example, that are singing from the same hymn book, so to speak?
Is that question for me, Tom?
Why not?
Okay, so to some extent, I think civil society plays a similar role as a sector broadly. But I do think to some extent, OUTA has its own kind of niche thing that it works on. So does DOD, so does organizations like Equal Education, etc. But at the core of it is an anchoring point around strengthening democracy work. And I think that's what that is perhaps what all of us want to achieve. but we have different entry points to what it is we want to strengthen in democracy. So while OUTA may to some extent deal with corruption, deal with tax abuse, deal with all sorts of other things, and perhaps deal with it at a community level, so does DOD around anti-corruption work, strengthening democracy work.
Sure.
So does maybe education or social justice coalition, but that our entry points are all different. And just looking at how diverse the issues are, and maybe to some extent how the issues intersect, it does not necessarily mean that, we're all duplicating the work that we do. I think the intention is we have different entry points, like I had said, and that our ultimate goal is to strengthen democracy from whichever entry point we come from.
Let me ask Advocate Mujanka Gumbi about strengthening democracy. Perhaps a naive question from me, but why the need to strengthen a democracy when we've got one of the best constitutions in the world? I mean, we hold our constitution up and say this is one of the most progressive and greatest constitutions in the world. It seems from the outside that it's unbreakable, but why would we need to defend this concept or the idea of democracy?
Well, the Constitution on its own is not going to deliver the fruits of democracy. It's in its implementation that society would benefit from the constitutional dividend. So we have to defend it from the people that are supposed to give effect to the Constitution itself. We have to make sure that democratic dividend passes down to the people. That's what we say, that we are defending democracy, but we are also strengthening it. So it's not like we are saying the Constitution in itself is not a good base to start from, but you and I would know that it really has not lifted the majority of South Africans out of poverty. And so something needs to be done to make sure that people are lifted out of democracy. And a campaign such as this, just to build on what Dudu said,
yes,
it's broader. It's not an organization. It's something that carries everyone, and the voice of different organizations within a campaign such as this are important. But it really is one of the widest platform within which to say, we need to reset the clock. We can't continue as we have. I mean, if you look at even just the floods in Durban, and you look at the settlements, people cannot live like that. We should not have, in the first instance, allowed people to live in settlements like that. And it's possible to do it differently. It is possible. We may not get it right immediately, but it really is possible within the constraints, the fiscal constraints that we have. It's possible to do it differently. I'm totally convinced that we can.
I agree with you, ma'am. I guess let's shine a light on the conference paper on democratic renewal and change. Sees it feeds into this conversation and what you've just said. That you've got this conference paper on democratic renewal and change. It's a national discussion paper that intends to facilitate discussion on issues of accountability and ethical leadership, management of the public purse and the state, service delivery to all, strengthening and protecting constitutional democracy, and reimagining a South African politics that is progressive and people-centered. Let me ask Zakira Vadi, why is that? Why the need for this conference paper on, and why are we using these words, democratic renewal and change?
Thanks for that, Tom. I think let's focus on the second part of the question, which is renewal and change. I think they two very distinct words.
Yes.
There are some parts of our democracy that we want to renew. So where, for example, public participation is working, it's something that needs to be strengthened, it needs to be renewed. Trust in the Constitution needs to be renewed. There may be other elements of our democracy that are functioning, they just need greater support, and we need to persevere on it. But there are fundamental parts of our democracy that require change. So, for example, the norms and standards to which we hold leaders accountable. If, for example, a politician does something wrong in a different country under COVID conditions, there's a likelihood that that politician or minister may be fired immediately or may feel the need to step down from office immediately. But in South Africa, it's not always the case. We had a minister, for example, that faced some sort of sanction, but should that have been greater sanction that was imposed? So I think that the norms and standards that we hold leaders accountable to, the issues of corruption and oversight. There's been great debate about the Constitution, whether we should change the Constitution or we shouldn't change the Constitution. We think that it's a debate that we shouldn't shy away from, where we don't want to change the overall values of the Constitution, but there may be elements of it, for example, the way a president appoints particular people to particular positions. Maybe we want to put in more checks and balances, and therefore the Constitution and how it defines it may want to change. So that's what we look at when we say change and renewal. Why this confidence at this point in time? I think that the country is almost at, some may say, the precipice at the moment. It will take something very slight, like it did last year with the July uprising, to just shift things very quickly. And we see these fracturing points on a consistent basis. So, for example, a fight between two learners at school that has racial overtones can very quickly involve the entire community, involve different political parties. And we see this at different levels of society, be it gender-based violence, be it at a political level, at an economic level. And things in a situation like that, when people are pushed to the brink, can shift very quickly. And when a country is shifted to that point, what do you need as an anchoring ground so that it doesn't result in a July 2021 again? What do you do to ensure that citizens are conscientized enough to make the right choices during a situation like that? And this conference is really beginning to build towards that. Some people have asked if we're trying to form a second UDF. Our answer to that is that perhaps in the kind of systems or level of organization and mobilization, it's something that we could look to. But this is not, the UDF was fundamentally about overthrowing the state. Yeah. We don't want to overthrow the state. We believe that we're in a democracy, and our democracy, where it's working, must be supported and strengthened. And where it isn't working, there is a need for some sort of shift and change. Lastly, Tom, I think that we have been saying that politics has become the sole preserve of political parties. Political parties and what they do dominates the news very often. And it's almost as if they hold the sway over what's being said politically, where if we are saying that this is a government by the people, for the people, shouldn't the people have a greater say in politics over and beyond just voting or not voting at a particular point in time?
Well, let me ask Dudwet-Sang I guess a follow-up question to that, and that is that the conference paper suggests a change in politics or the political system of this country. And I'm thinking of our particular democracy, our constitutional democracy we've got, and then thinking of things like parliamentary democracies. Are you suggesting a change in the democratic system or an overhaul of public representation by political parties? You might be on mute again.
I was actually checking. Okay. So no, I think that, as Zakira said, where the Constitution or our political system functions properly but may need a bit of strengthening, then we should focus on that. But where there is need for fundamental change or a shift in the way our politics works, then we need to start having debates, public debates about, okay, so how then do we fix it? How then do we renew it? What is our reimagined kind of change within our political system? So, for instance, when we think of when we entertain conversations around transitioning to a parliamentary democracy, what do we mean? What do we imagine that to look like? And what sort of examples can we pick up from the apartheid system, which was a parliamentary democracy, and what were the problems around that? Right, the fact that it served a minority group, the fact that there was separate development, and that laws could be created at a whim. And how do we think about those kinds of things, and what would the consequence be to our constitution? If we support such a movement, do we then do away completely with our constitution? And what kind of society then do we imagine if we entertain such a thing, and really look into the dangers of transitioning to a parliamentary democracy? So I think, like what Zakira was saying, is we are a constitutional democracy, and that is the kind of political regime we have gained consensus on since 1994. And where it is not working, we should have public debates and conversations around how can that be changed for the better. I think that if we are to entertain those sort of parliamentary democracy, we would be regressing as a constitution, because that would mean that, a central figure called a legislature would have whole power. They would change laws at a whim, and that, one wonders whether the public, us, we would have a say in things. And I think that is something quite scary to think about.
Yes.
So, yeah, in a nutshell, I don't think that that's what we're trying to do. I think, as Zakira correctly put it, that there must be change where we think that our constitution lacks something that could potentially strengthen it. But we're not saying that we want an overhaul of our democratic or constitutional democracy.
As you talk, Dudetsang, I'm thinking of, and it sounds silly, but I'm thinking of the operating system on my cell phone, which I accept is the operating system on my cell phone, but it requires updates. It requires engineers to look at it and say, right, that's not working. We need to change that. Is this almost like a South African democracy version 2.0 that you're looking for? An improved version?
Yes, I think we must not understand our constitution as something that is going to be static. For instance, I'll make the example of when we think about how social media and technology is changing the way in which we think of our day-to-day lives and the way in which we experience life, that it doesn't mean that this thing that is being engineered to maybe make life a bit more convenient doesn't mean that there aren't potential dangers to it. And that where there are potential dangers, we need to create laws that can enhance our experience, so that at least the experience is wholesome, at least the experience is healthy, and that at least the experience enhances society positively and meaningfully. So similarly with the Constitution, where there are loopholes in the Constitution, or there are parts of the Constitution that needs to be strengthened, we need to advocate for that. And I think there's nothing wrong. We cannot imagine our Constitution as something that is static. And I also want to go back to what Advocate Gumbi said earlier, that if we have this brilliant Constitution that has all of these progressive values, and yet at the same time there are South Africans who don't necessarily bear or enjoy the fruits of this kind of democracy, then we need to sit and think about how we can improve the lives of South Africans through this constitution, and where there are gaps, we need to fill those gaps up. But the one thing that we should not do is try and change the constitution in a way that does not necessarily provide meaningful improvements in the lives of South Africans or is perhaps regressive.
Well, let's talk about change in just a moment. And by the way, if you've just joined us, welcome to the conversation. Welcome to the Outer Hour. I'll be putting some of your questions and comments to our guests in just a moment, so keep them coming. But let's talk about change and changes to our political system. And let me ask Advocate Gumbi this question. What changes, Advocate, are needed in our political system to enable better cooperation between political parties on all of these issues that will enhance the well-being of citizens and improve the services to our communities? What change do you envisage or desire?
First of all, we need accountability. Our political system has to have an inbuilt formal accountability mechanism. As things stand right now, parliamentarians are given constituencies. They're very informal process. Sometimes they go to the constituencies, at times they don't. And they receive an allowance to set up those constituency offices. None of the constituents hold them accountable for that. Because when they go to the constituency, they go as parliamentarians, not as members of a political party. So they have to address the needs of the whole constituency and take that back to Parliament and use that to hold the executive accountable. That doesn't happen. So we may need an element of formality around that. I think secondly, the checks and balances that our constitution introduced are some of the best at a high level. I mean, Parliament remains a very powerful institution because that's where the laws are made. That's where you and I are regulated. Everything that we do, who can drive, who can't, who can drink, who can't, even everything is decided by Parliament as long as it is within the confines of the Constitution. So all that the Constitutional Court does is to check, have you done your work properly? Mm-hmm. They never take over Parliament's work, ever. You would know even where they find that they've not done their work properly. They refer the matter back to them. They never say, oh, we will correct what you did. Yeah. No. So Parliament remains a very powerful organization. So one of the ways in which we need to strengthen accountability, you have a committee called SCOPA, which is chaired by a member of the opposition. We may want to look at the role of non-governing parties in Parliament and bring that role a little more in the critical committees of Parliament, because it serves no purpose to say that parliaments hold the executive accountable if they are all just members of the same party. They go to a caucus in Parliament and they get an instruction from the SV and they all hold that line. I mean, we've seen it. President Zuma's swimming pool that you and I know turned into a fire pool. So, and that can happen with any president. I'm not just picking on him. So I think we need to then define that role of opposition parties a little more, to make it a little more formal, and the accountability. And I don't know if Zakira or Dudletang spoke about municipal level. You are allowed to come as a community into a sitting of the council at the municipal level, and you are allowed to, how much they received from national, how much they collected. You need to say to them, but last year you said you are going to use that 3 million to build a sewage system. That sewage system is not there. Can you tell us where that 3 million went? That's what you need to do. That's what the active citizenry is about. So we hope that, we would revive that sense of active citizenship. And nobody can tell you, go jump. Of course, we are worried about the violence that has been introduced into our society, where it's very difficult to play, especially at the local level. Mm-hmm. But if the whole community is involved, you can't kill all of them.
Here's some of the questions coming in. Abin Seda asks, how is Defend Our Democracy funded? Let me ask Dudwet-san that question. Dudwet-san, how are you funded?
So we are funded by just various organizations who share the same kind of sentiment that, or the same kind of values that Defend Our Democracy espouses. Much of the funding is us just going out to organizations or companies and requesting that kind of funding. So that's basically how we are funded. We are, as the campaign grows, will have, for instance, like face-to-face fundraising campaigns that we will put up where we will reach out to members of the public to donate to the campaign. But for now, we have mainly just been funded by companies that believe in the kind of work that the campaign is doing.
Here's a question from, did someone want to continue? Yes.
I wanted to say, Dudwet-san should say the campaign is looking for money. Mm-hmm. So if anyone on the platform wants to donate, they are welcome. You don't know how to pass the head around. Thanks.
Got it.
I think I was being shy to ask for money.
Oh, really?
But Advocate Gumbi is correct.
Advocate Gumbi is certainly not shy, man. Right. Let me put another comment to you. Here's one from Christo Fento, who says we've got too many civil organizations. It's time for everyone to get together and create a super group. Is that the aim?
So I think that it really depends on the outcomes of the conference. This conference, as much as it's about democratic renewal and change, is also about the future of the DoD. When we started a year ago, it was a very kind of ad hoc move by Evan Chikane and a group of other activists saying, let's pull together and do this as a temporary measure. And the future of the campaign is going to be determined by this conference, whether we should become a think tank, whether we should become a movement. For now, there's a lot of talk about the possibility of the campaign becoming a movement, but there's a whole lot of work that goes into pulling a movement together. It has to be national. It has to be representative of different organizations, discussions around leadership and affiliation to a movement. And those are things that we hope will be thrashed out at this particular conference. We have, however, certainly seen the benefit of creating a structure that's loose enough to accommodate people on a set of minimum aims, objectives, or values and principles. And the type of thing that we've seen in the past is that when you create a platform that's neutral, but has very specific positions on, for example, accountability, it creates an opportunity for an organization like, for instance, the Helen Suzman Foundation on the one hand, and COSATU on the other hand, that may have very different ideological stances on issues, come together into the same room. With this campaign, we've seen, for example, a similar sort of thing, where organizations who don't necessarily see eye to eye on something like SAA or don't necessarily see eye to eye on particular, particular objectives can find commonality on issues of democratic renewal. And we think that that's the benefit of it. And very much like the UDF model, it's a set of core values, it's a set of one vision, and it's then driving that in building consensus where a national organization can be part of it, but even your local netball club can see the need to affiliate to it as well. So those are things that are currently in discussion. And I think post-conference, we will have better clarity on where we are headed to as a campaign, and whether we are taking that route and whether we will be formalizing at that stage. But it's something that I think we will have to come back to. And again, this is something that through the discussion paper, if any of the listeners want to have input on that, please do share your thoughts with us. because that's one of the questions. In the end, we would welcome feedback.
Fantastic. We'll put, I'm sure Sam and Masego will put details on how to get hold of you in the comment section down below this video. Do you believe our constitutional democracy is under threat? Are there telltale signs of threats to our democracy? Anyone can answer this. Whoever talks first.
Absolutely.
How so, Advocate?
I think on a daily basis there are people who are working towards undermining our constitutional democracy, undermining the very basis on which we built this country. I have no doubt about that. I think that we should not take that threat lying down. It's a real threat. I think that the underdevelopment and the poverty and hunger of the majority of South Africans is capable of being used to spark a real rebellion. Zakira spoke about it earlier in Twitter. It's not an empty threat, it's real. And I think that the levels of unemployment, especially amongst the youth, the way they are so dejected, is also an ingredient for someone with some intentions to just light that fire. I think I won't say much about the July riots as one who was at the center of it. I mean, we've agreed not to talk about our report because it's the president's report, not ours. But all of us saw what happened. Well, so I think we really should take this matter seriously.
I'm listening to what you're saying and thinking back to this afternoon when I was scrolling through Twitter, and I see one of the biggest trending topics on Twitter is a national shutdown and a proposed national shutdown. A lot of the attention around this national shutdown the hashtag is simply around an increase in the petrol price. And I'm listening to what you're saying and wondering how close we are to a day where South Africa gets shaken to pieces because of a bread price increase or a petrol price, something so simple that affects so many people. Is that your concern?
Absolutely. I mean, Sudan, it was around the bread price. But, there had been underlying unhappiness. And we see it here. As I say, I cited just issues of how people live. I cited issues of, Zakira spoke about health, access to health. We spoke about youth unemployment. It's going to take very little to ignite that spark. And so, I mean, I think we have to pay attention. And I think as citizens, we must play our role in making sure that the government is aware of what is really going on. And because, we don't want to go there. I can assure you, we don't want to go to the rebuilding a state that has, just exploded. We don't want to do that. Better save what you have.
Yes. Madeleine Gertsch says if it does not change, it should at least be adhered to. Jennifer van der Walt says our country is in trauma, very severe trauma. Lots of comments coming in, including Clive Beckett, who is a regular contributor and viewer to the show. Clive wants more involvement from the listeners, and you'll be pleased to know, Clive, that most of our studio work is done on very simple equipment, and so it's not, we don't have a big radio station we work with where we just, like the old talk radio days, just line listeners up and get you on air. But you'll be pleased to know that right now we're busy getting new gear, we're busy investing in a new studio, and then all of these things you're wishing for, and I'm seeing come across the screen, will be technically possible. It's a technical thing, but we have. I mean, I was chatting with Wayne earlier on saying, hey, the new gear's on the way, and Samantha van Nispen. So you can look forward to exciting changes, Clive, including more calls and video calls and all sorts of things that we'll be able to do in the future. So your comment is noted, but please know that there's a lot happening behind the scene on the Outer Hour to get to that place that you want to get to too, by the way. We've got a couple of minutes left. Let me ask about transitioning to a parliamentary democracy, because we did touch on it a little earlier on. Let me ask Dudwetsang Meti whether the campaign has a stance on this. Do you think we should transition to a parliamentary democracy from a constitutional democracy?
Sorry. No, we shouldn't. And I think we've learned, pre-democracy, that the system just didn't work. It worked to serve a few people, and it placed at the helm of power this legislative body that could create laws as and when it wanted to. And I think one good example is how the Subukwe clause was put up during apartheid, and how, there was no ways in which one could challenge this kind of law with the Constitutional Court. And so when we think about transitioning to a parliamentary democracy, these are the kinds of examples that come to mind. That, for instance, like if we were to apply it in the context of now, Parliament wants to, almost increase with the Electoral Reform Act and the Political Party Funding Act. They want to increase the amount of money through which they are meant to disclose who's funding them. And so in the event that we were to transition to a parliamentary democracy, you would have no say. And you wouldn't have a constitutional court available to go and challenge these things, because Parliament would have the final say. And so when you think about these kinds of things, these are the kinds of examples that come up, and these are the kinds of dangers that a parliamentary democracy presents. So we don't agree with that. We, again, like we had said earlier, believe in our constitutional democracy, and we believe that where things need to be strengthened, they must. But we're not trying to wholly do away with our constitutional democracy as it is.
And what are the desired outcomes of the conference paper we mentioned earlier and the conference itself?
So there's a couple of things. I think from the conference itself, on the one hand, we want to identify and find consensus on the threats to democracy, why those threats exist, as well as the kind of solutions and broad thinking in response to those threats. Secondly, as stated earlier, we do want to, I think, determine the future of the Defend Our Democracy campaign. But beyond that, I think there's a couple of key things that we want to determine from this conference. The one is, what are the kinds of national campaigns that we need to build to safeguard our constitutional democracy? And these things don't need to be abstract. It can be something like national campaigns to get our streetlights fixed, or national campaigns to sort out our pothole problem, for example. But it needs to be something that appeals to people across the board, and something that anyone, even at a local level, at any level, will be able to mobilize around. Then I think there's one of the things that we want to draw from this conference is learning from each other, both locally, nationally, and internationally. Advocate Gumbi mentioned the situation in Sudan. We see something taking place similar to that in Sri Lanka at the moment. We've seen how other democracies, both within the developed world, for example, the US, faced great threats. For example, the storming of the US Capitol just in this recent period. Whereas we've seen, for example, in India and Bolsonaro, how you see the kind of rise of right-wing nationalism and how that impacts a democracy. So I think we have a lot to learn from others, both internationally, But locally as well, there may be some best practices that we can draw on. At a local level, there are communities, for example, that have challenged particular municipalities, and we may want to look into those examples as well. Consider changes to the kind of constitutional and political systems. I think Duru has spoken to quite a bit of that. But what sort of political systems do we want that will ensure greater accountability? So the paper, for example, talks about should we be looking at electoral reform as a particular change to the political system? Do we want to elect our president directly? Do we want to elect our politicians directly and therefore have greater say on who our leaders are? So I think those are some of the debates that we can look forward to. Focus on making a public service that works for all. I think this is critical. People have spoken about the role of public servants and how there's a need to almost strengthen the hand of honest public servants, not only those who blow the whistle and those who come out, but those who are within the system that are really trying to make things work. And Prof. Mark Swilling has been talking about this for many years. How do you build networks around the good people within the public service so that the bad networks and the corrupt networks don't try to corrupt those who are good within the system? Addressing issues of economic justice, climate change, and socioeconomic rights. I think the campaign here is well aware that it itself, together with any individual organization, is not equipped to entirely deal with the situation, economic justice, climate change, etc. There are organizations who are doing niche work, but there is a need to strengthen those organizations to support them on an ongoing basis. And this is if you look at, for example, socioeconomic rights, there are organizations who are doing work around investigating how effective the basic income grant will be. And based on that, do we then find consensus? Do we support these organizations? Do we support the calls that they're making? So I think that's what we're looking at in relation to that objective. National campaigns to combat state capture and corruption. I think this is critical. We have these Zondo Commission reports that will be finalized. There'll be a set of recommendations that are being made. We've heard that government wants to respond formally and say what it will be doing to implement it. But by December this year, say December 9th is International Anti-Corruption Day, if we find that government is not making any move to meaningfully begin implementing those recommendations, what should be the response of the public to that? How should we be mobilizing to put the pressure on government that it has to do what those reports call for? And then lastly is developing this notion of a new politics that's citizen-centered, accountable, and transparent. And I think that's what the overall objective of this conference is, that this toxic political culture needs to change. We can't have parties that are self-centered or fixated on their own renewal, on their own factional fights, on who will be the next leaders and jostling for positions of power, when their purpose should be, if they do assume power, either through coalitions come 2024 nationally, or if there's a particular ruling party, or if there's ruling parties or governing parties at the provincial and local level, how do we ensure that we have a similar yardstick for all of them, and that their work is primarily centered around service to the public? So how do we shift those power dynamics fundamentally?
As you talk, I'm drawn to this comment from Kara, who says, if we don't deal with the root cause, politicians, we have to keep making more and more laws to stop corruption and thereby restricting the honest. We see this in procurement, where there are many checks and balances. It restricts progress. The politicians don't care for such things as checks and balances. We should do psych tests and weed them out from the start. It will save us in the long run. Well, I suppose we could chat for another hour, but our time is out, and enough time to ask. Let me ask Duduet Sang, how can people get involved in the DOD's campaign conference that you've been mentioning and beyond the conference?
So one of the things we have put out is a call for comment on the conference paper itself. As we said, that while the campaign is putting this conference paper out, we want ordinary citizens to really take ownership of it. And so where they feel there are gaps in the conference paper, where they feel something must be emphasized more or something must be excluded from the conference paper, they are more than welcome to make those kinds of suggestions. We are also appealing to ordinary members of society, community action networks, community organizations, or any kind of organization for that matter, if they would like to hold facilitated sessions around the conference paper, to please get in touch with us on our website, defendourdemocracy.co.za. They could also email us at defendourdemocracy1@gmail.com. Alternatively, they could reach us through our various social media channels, particularly Facebook and Twitter. And these are some of the ways in which they can get in touch with us to either, one, host a facilitated workshop around the conference paper, or two, give submission and comment on the conference paper itself.
Got it. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. What a fascinating conversation tonight. I'd like to thank our guests on screen now. We're just looking for Advocate Gumbi, who I think, there we go. So thank you. All three on screen right now. Zakira Vadi, thank you very much for joining us. Advocate Majanka Gumbi, thank you, ma'am, for your time tonight. And Duduetsang Meti, thank you for your time this evening. It's been fantastic having you on the Outer Hour. Do have a good evening, and I hope you stay warm.
Thanks so much, Tom.
And
thanks to the listeners.
Take care. And that's it for tonight. We'll be back with you again next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Can't wait to see you for another Outer Hour. 7 o'clock is when you can catch us live. Of course, you can watch the show at any time on Facebook and YouTube at your leisure after we have been on air. So, if you're watching us post-live, thank you for hitting that play button. And look forward to seeing you on the next Outer Hour. Until then, stay safe, stay warm. Hope you give a lot of love, get a lot of love, and make a little bit of money. But most of all, I hope you're back with us next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Until then, I'm Tom London, and I miss you already.
Our fight to eradicate corruption, maladministration, unethical leaders, and the abuse of taxpayers' money by those in power continues. It's fresh, it's fearless, and focused. The Outer Hour, where your voice matters.